going to start out by removing the Exoterra background, and I'm actually going to save this to utilize in another build in the future. So subscribe to see how I use this. But once I get it out, which ended up being a little harder than I thought, I'm actually going to use it as a barrier so you can't see my feet because feet are gross. Then I'm just going to clip the lid back in because I actually prefer building backgrounds with the lid in. It's really easy to pull them off. Then I'm going to use the Great Stuff foam, spray foam, which is what I always use, and go ahead and just cover most of the background. I actually decided after I did this to leave a little bit at the bottom just to give more burrowing opportunities, and I ended up cutting the spot down there that I did cover off to leave about 1.5 inches at the bottom. I plan on putting more substrate than that, but I just thought about I don't know, I thought it was a good idea, so I did it. Okay. Yeah, so I sprayed this in. I just did a small layer because if you do too big of a layer, it gets big, huge air pockets, and I wanted this to be flush against the wall anyway, since it's not a huge enclosure. And then I put this piece of cork in here as like a tunnel / climbing because my toads do like to climb. So I wanted to give an ability to utilize all of the space. So I just kind of leaned it up against the wall and put a little bit extra underneath to try supporting the bottom of it so it didn't kind of topple down, because spray foam does take about 8 hours to cure, so I was planning on having to leave this overnight and I didn't want to come back and have it completely fallen. So I just put a little bit extra down underneath, and that'll help support it in the long term as well. And honestly, I ended up carving away a lot of it because I didn't want to take a bunch of their space, but this helped in the initial process to get it supported in place to make sure that I can have this nice log. Then I just left it to cure. Like I said, it took about 8 hours to fully cure. And by the way, I had to use about 1/3 of the can of spray foam. This enclosure is not too big. Then I began carving. I carved away all of the shiny bits. I didn't record the whole thing because honestly that is the absolute worst part, but I do think it is necessary. It's going to give you the best sticking of the silicone to the foam and then the dirt onto the silicone. So just go ahead and take your time, carve all of it away. I also think more is less when carving, so always over carve. The more you take away, honestly, I think the more you end up liking it. If you leave too much of it, it's gonna just have that kind of like mashed potato-y looking fake texture. So go ahead and carve like different rocks or wood textures or whatever you want to do. I take my time in carving. Like I said, I hate it, but it's always worth it in the end to do a good job carving at the beginning, because I do have a couple that I'm going to have to redo that I never did builds on in the past because I skipped this step, and eventually the silicone and stuff just falls off and it ends up looking like crap. So it's definitely worth it to do it right the first time. Don't skip steps. Make sure you carve the whole thing and kind of carve it in a way that you are going to like. This is how I end up carving it. Like I said, I took quite a bit of it off because I didn't want it to take up too much of the actual enclosure itself. And like I said, I did carve majority of that stuff underneath away too because I didn't just want big bubble under there, but just enough to still support the log. What I've done is put silicone down and then some eco earth and patted it down. I'm gonna let it stick as much as possible, and then I'll probably put more silicone on the bare spots like that and more eco earth. And any extra spots that are still looking pretty bare, I'm actually going to use dry lock and paint like rocks. I've had pretty bad luck doing this method, which is why I like the dry lock method more, but for my toads, I do want to do a little more of like a natural look, and they're not really around like a ton of like rock walls. So I thought I could do a combination of both, and hopefully it will work to my advantage. But this is where I'm at right now. Okay, so now I got most of the eco earth stuck to the background. I did decide to start using black silicone because I was having a hard time getting the silicone to stick to the background, and there was a bunch of spots showing through, so I was hoping if the black was showing through it wouldn't be as noticeable. So I did switch to black silicone, and I tried patching up as much of the spots as I could, but ultimately I still don't really love how this method turns out. However, I do think it's going to look best for the toads, so I'm hoping maybe with one more layer I can try getting it to look a little better. I might silicone some moss or something to the back too, but I'll show you that when I figure out what to do. So I started by emptying the toad's current enclosure. I wanted to use all of their current substrate, which is BioActive Terra Flora, and so I just emptied all of their current substrate. I wanted that to make up about a third of what I had in there, just so it smelled like them. It was familiar. It was their kind of, you know, territory. I also took all the moss out and put it in a bucket to soak because I did want to use that as well. Then I also used about a third of Eco Earth. I did this partially because I wanted it to absorb humidity a little bit better. So I also added a whole thing of water, and I just slowly add water throughout to mix it up and dampen it up. You don't want it soaking by any means, but definitely pretty damp, and the Eco Earth I was using was dry out of the bag, so that stuff needs to moisten up quite a bit. So like I said, I mixed in the Eco Earth with the old Terra Flora just to try holding humidity a little bit better. Eco Earth is pretty good at holding humidity. I just don't like it as a standalone substrate because it's not awesome for BioActive, and I do plan on adding a cleanup crew in here to help a little bit with the mess, because anyone that owns toads or frogs know that they poop a lot and large. So I just mixed all of that up together in here. My goal was to have about 4 inches of substrate in the back, going to the water at the front, having a little less. Then I added some more of BioActive's Terra Flora, some new fresh substrate for the other third. I ended up adding almost this entire, like what I had left of this bag. Obviously it wasn't full when I started. But the cool thing with this substrate is it's not like you have to throw it away and replace it very often, if not at all. So it is expensive, but it's a really awesome substrate. I use all the different kinds for all my different animals. So once I figured out exactly how much substrate I want in there, I mixed everything together. So all 3 were kind of equally blended in there. I added more water just to moisten it a little more because the BioActive substrate was open for a while. It's not as moist as when you get it brand new out of the bag. So I just wanted to mix in a little more water. Like I said, I don't want it dripping by any means, but just more moist than it is to get the cleanup crew ready, and also just for the toads themselves to have some humidity. They don't need it wet by any means, but they do need a little more humid than a screen top enclosure is very good at giving. So I'm hoping with the deep substrate I will be able to help combat that. And then I also do have a piece of cardboard to put and cover part of the lid, but I wanted it to be tall enough that that little tunnel thing was a hide and also a like ramp bridge thing. So then I just moved the substrate out of the way to put my water dish back where I thought I would want it. I do have like a syringe, like siphon thing that I use to spot clean my water every day. So I won't have to pull it out every day, probably just once a week or once every 2 weeks to do a nice deep clean. So I didn't want it to be too far in the back because I will have to pull it out, and I didn't want to have to completely dig it, but I wanted it to be sitting flush on the glass so the toads could not bury themselves under there and get stuck or anything. And then I just kind of surrounded it back in with the substrate, so it was mostly like covered. Then I went in one of these fake potted plants from Michael's that I like to use in a lot of my builds, especially if it is an animal that will destroy things. This, since it has a pot, is a lot harder to tip over or pull out or mess up. So I just wanted to give one nice little piece of greenery. And then I also have this other piece of wood that I thought would be a good climbing opportunity on the other side, and just help them utilize a little more of the space, because like I said, my toads do like to climb quite a bit, and I want to give them opportunity to do so. When I first got them, I didn't realize that they would climb so much. There's not a ton of research on them, so I've been trying to learn and adapt as I see what they like to do. And climbing and burrowing is two things that I wanted to give them a little more opportunity to do, more than they had in their previous setup. So I tried to demonstrate that in this enclosure build. Then I just went in with a couple of the pieces of cork from their old enclosure. I have this awesome like half tunnel piece of cork I wanted to use as a start of a burrowing. One of my toads really loves sitting under this and just hanging out. They do usually sleep in the same spot, but the one just really likes it under there. So I think it's a girl, I don't know, she usually is under there more. And then I don't like how this looks, but they absolutely love climbing on it, so I didn't want to take it away. So I decided to try incorporating this little mossy bendy bridge thing in their enclosure. It usually looks a lot better in like crested gecko enclosures where it's not the focal point. Since this enclosure is kind of small and a little more terrestrial, it is a kind of a focal point. But like I said, they do like to use it. It's their house, so they should be able to have what they've enjoyed. And like I said, they do really like being on this. They'll jump from one end to the other, and then it's also a good place to put crickets in there, because the crickets will stand on the moss and not just bury themselves right away. So I'm kind of just rearranging a little bit to be able to squeeze this in here. I wanted to make it a little more active than their previous setup, just to make sure that they have a lot of hiding spots, climbing spots. I was trying to make it better. And then this last little piece of cork I wanted to put sort of around the water dish, so when they're soaking, because they are little private animals, they could kind of feel secure and hidden in there. So I ended up making like a little covered area with that. And then I filled up the water dish with, of course, RepiSafe water. Like I said, I spot clean it with a siphon, so it shouldn't be too hard. Then I grabbed one of my cultures of dwarf white isopods and put quite a few in there. I probably put about 40 isopods in there. I'm hoping that they will be able to find a home. My toads, I don't think will bother the isopods too much. They hunt for their crickets and stuff, but we'll see. Hopefully the isopods work out, but if not, it's fine. I'm gonna have to spot clean no matter what anyways, because toads and frogs are poop machines. But I thought I would at least try to get a little helpful cleanup crew in there. So I just put them kind of scattered around the cage to give them the best opportunity to find a hiding spot, and hopefully they figure out where they want to be. I don't know. And then I grabbed my bucket of moss that I had soaking, and I started wringing it out to put it on the floor, on top of the substrate. I like to do this in frog and toad enclosures just because when they jump in their water dish, it helps a little bit with the mess that they make. Sometimes they'll drag a whole piece of moss in there, but most of the time it helps quite a bit. The one thing I did realize I forgot to add is leaf litter, so I do need to go to the store and add some of that on top of the moss, but for now this will be fine. There was some leaf litter I added with the isopods, but just not enough to cover the floor like I usually would do in especially a terrestrial bioactive setup, but I just forgot to do that. So just imagine it with some leaf litter on there. But I covered most of the spots, especially around the water dish, with the wrung out moss. And just so you know, I did end up adding a piece of cardboard between the two enclosures so the animals in the tanks side by side can't see each other. I just didn't film it in this video, but you can see. And then I put my toads in there. They're my two Asian spiny toads. They just stood there for a while and then they decided to get settled in. Yeah, and now they're just completely hiding. But they get along well, they have fun. I think they're gonna love the space and the climbing opportunities. My one more bold toad was already climbing all over when I went to take some B-roll or like extra footage. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoy following along on my mission to upgrade all of my animals, and I will eventually do it one by one. So please like and subscribe. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys in my next video.